Good evening and welcome to People in Politics. My guest tonight is Barry Brown of the Georgia Civil War Commission. Welcome, Barry.
Good evening, Chad.
Barry, when was the commission created and why?
Well, the commission was created back in 1993. It was by an act of the legislature. However, to go into why, I'm going to have to go further back than that. Now, back around 1970, one of our commission members, Dr. Phil Sechrist, who had been Cobb County Commission Chair, had been an avid Civil War relic hunter, and he was hunting out in Paulding County on the battlefield of Pickett's Mill. And at the time, about 1970-71, Pickett's Mill was really just all wooded area, and Dr. Sechrist foresaw the urban sprawl that was going to be filling in the area, and he wanted to protect this precious little battlefield.
Now, may I interrupt you a second? Pickett's Mill, what area are we talking about in relation to Atlanta?
That's in Paulding County, right, very close to the Cobb County-Paulding County line. And as I said, it was all wooded at the time, and you had this battlefield with these entrenchments on Federal and the Confederate side, and this was a fight where 1,600 Federals, Union soldiers, had gotten shot down in a matter of 3 hours. And it was a little-known battlefield, and he hunted there, and he picked up a lot of mini balls and other accoutrements of soldiers during the time. And so what Dr. Sechrist did, seeing that this is endangered, is he purchased this 765 acres of battlefield piecemeal. Now, he's a professor at Kennesaw State University, and so he did this on a professor's salary. And he held this property until the late 80s, and he sold it back to the state. And the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, made it into a state Civil War park. And so that was sort of the beginning of the commission there, because Dr. Sechrist was involved in what was called the Atlanta Campaign Commission, which morphed into the Georgia Civil War Commission. Now, in 1993, when Zell Miller was governor, he had tried to change the state flag for the first time from the Confederates' St. Andrew's Cross to whatever they're going to change it to. And he ran into a lot of opposition, and as political cover, he formed the Civil War Commission along with this actor, Dr. Sechrist, of saving Civil War battlefields. And so since 1993, we have been preserving Civil War battlefields and historic sites throughout the state.
So for a trade-off, because people were upset that the Confederate battle emblem, which was put on the flag in 1956, was being changed, because many African Americans in the state of Georgia felt that it wasn't representing them, the governor proposed that the Civil War Commission be created to placate political opposition for the flag change. Is that correct?
It had more to do with placating voters who didn't want to see the flag changed, and preserving Civil War heritage, I think, was the next best thing that he could do, since he had already made them mad by trying to change the flag at that time. And so that was one of the reasons for the formation of the Civil War Commission. Of course, there's many reasons. That's just one of them.
What is the annual operating budget of the Georgia Civil War Commission?
It was $58,000
per year.
Per year, and that's 2 part-time employees and 15 members.
And the staff of the Civil War Commission is composed of only 2 employees?
Myself, who is the project coordinator, and the gentleman I work with, Dr. Rich Elwell, who is the administrator.
And how did you get involved with the Civil War Commission?
I had been involved in another industry I was in the travel industry, and the travel industry was really going down the tubes, and I was trying to find another line of employment. So I had gone to a Civil War presentation by a gentleman named Oliver Keller one night at Georgia Tech, and after the presentation, I began talking to Mr. Keller, and he told me about the position being open, because after talking with me, he knew that I was aware of Civil War history, something that I've been studying since I was a child. And he offered me the job, and I had just quit my other job and was, as I say, looking for a new line of work. and was hired by the state to work as the part-time project coordinator for the Georgia Civil War Commission.
And what year was that?
That was in 2000.
And who was the Georgia Civil War Commissioner before that? You said the commission formed in 1993.
Yeah, they have anywhere from a 1 to a 4-year appointment. Now, the commissioners are appointed by, there's 5 appointed by the governor, 5 appointed by the lieutenant governor, and 5 appointed by the speaker. And they are all running terms of anywhere from 1 to 4 years.
What kind of background do the commissioners that serve come from? What backgrounds do they have?
A lot of the commissioners are educators. For instance, Dr. Sechrest, as I said, is a history professor at Kennesaw. And we have Dr. Gene Hatfield, who is a history professor at Clayton State. And then we have Mariel Jocelyn, who is an author. And we've had a woman who, Valeria McPhail, who was, she was a secretary to a politician, I think. So they're appointed for different reasons. Some of them have backgrounds in history. Some of them are, it's a political appointment. But they all have some interest in history.
And how often does the commission meet, and what do they discuss at the commission meetings?
The commission meets monthly, and we meet at the Historic Preservation Division offices, which is on Trinity Street, because we are part of the State Historic Preservation Division of the Department of Natural Resources. And so we have monthly meetings, and then 4 times a year we have a meeting in another part of the state. Different cities around the state will sponsor the commission meeting.
Now, you mentioned that some of these commissioners are appointed by the governor, some are appointed by the Speaker of the House. What do they base their appointments, decisions on?
That's a good question. We really have no control over that, and generally it's someone who has an association with history, whether it be an author or an educator, or sometimes just there's a lawyer, for instance, we have now who has no real history background, just an interest in history. So it's up to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker who they want to appoint.
And is it, you said that they serve 1 to 4 year terms?
Yes.
When you go out and look for places to preserve, how do you get people to donate money to preserve Civil War battlefields? Where does the money come from to purchase the land?
Well, lately, the trend in giving to preservation is to relate to green space. So people who don't have necessarily an interest in history will have an interest in green space. Now, one of the latest large plots of land that we preserved was over off of Cascade Road in the Utoy Creek Cascade area, and it was a plot of land owned by Lionel Hampton. Now,
The jazz musician, Lionel Hampton?
the jazz xylophonist Lionel Hampton. And some people were interested in the earthworks. This was a site where the federal earthworks from General Palmer's 14th Corps had dug in during the month of August of 1864 in the Atlanta campaign, which was the month of the siege operations. And some people who wanted the history preserved, others who didn't want to see 3-bedroom apartments built on this 105-acre plot of land, these rolling hills around Utoy Creek with there's deer and other wildlife, and they just wanted to see the land preserved, which would also preserve the property values in the area's neighborhood.
How many acres was that at Utoy Creek that was preserved?
105.
And was it preserved both as a green space and a Civil War preservation site?
Both, exactly. And then the city of Atlanta, it was given to the city of Atlanta. Arthur Blank, he put $1 million towards the acquisition, and we also got money from the city of Atlanta Quality of Life bond issue, and the total purchase price was $2.65 million, I think, and I believe, if I remember my figures correctly. And after the land was purchased, the Civil War Commission can't hold property, so we turned it over to the city of Atlanta, who made it into a passive park. A passive park meaning they're really not going to do anything to it. It just will remain as green space with some running trails through it.
Now, will there be markers in this green space that signify that it was once a Civil War battle site?
That's what we hope to do, because there's lines of trench works through the fields and some really large siege trenches. And the idea would be to put interpretive markers and a trail And that is one of the projects we hope to have completed in the future.
What kind of reactions do you get from people who own the land that you want to purchase to preserve as a Civil War site?
I mean, people want to sell their property. They want to make money on their property when they sell it, of course. And a lot of times people would prefer to sell property and not have it developed. Other times people want it developed because it's all associated with property values and what they can make off of it. However, there's different reactions. I can tell you a story about one time we were attempting to buy land at a battlefield north of Atlanta in Bartow County called Allatoona Pass. And Allatoona Pass is an old railroad pass where the Western Atlantic Railroad had run through with a fort on one side, a regular circular fort, and a star-shaped fort on the other side. And part of the star-shaped fort was owned by two brothers in Bartow County. And they were going to sell it to the commission to make it part of the Allatoona State Park. The other part is owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. And the Allatoona Pass battlefield was put on the 10 most endangered list of the Civil War Preservation Trust. Now, after it was put on the endangered list, the brothers saw that the property was on the list, and they raised the price beyond what we could pay for it, because we can only pay the market value, the assessed market value.
Now, that's a national list that puts the 10 most endangered battlefield sites?
The Civil War Preservation Trust is a national organization, and it's a national list of battlefields all around the Southeast. And, of course, each year they have a different list of which ones they feel are the most endangered, and those are the ones that the preservation efforts go towards.
Does the Georgia Civil War Commission work with that national trust in any way?
Yes, we do. For instance, in February, they had a gentleman down from the Civil War Preservation Trust, and I took him around the Smyrna-Mableton area and showed him the trenches on one of the Commission's current projects, the Johnson River Line. And he was down here because the Civil War Preservation Trust was planning on a Georgia initiative because they've been spending a lot of money in Virginia, for instance, and they wanted to start saving some property in Georgia. So we do have some connection with them, yes.
That land at Allatoona Pass, what has happened to that as of today? Did the seller ever eventually sell that land?
No, it remains in the brothers' hands, and it's still, well, the park is still there with the little plot of land of theirs around it, and they still own it.
When you purchase a Civil War site, what actually remains from a battle that was fought over 140 years ago?
Now, Chad, that all depends. We had been involved in the Battle of Browns Mill, which is down in Noonan. Now, Browns Mill was a cavalry action, so you have just large numbers of horsemen fighting with swords and pistols. And it was over, they moved over a large amount of land. They didn't just stay in one spot. On a site like that, you're not going to find much of anything. I mean, you may find a few spent bullets, maybe some buckles or something from horse equipment. But there are no earthworks, and it just looks like flat, regular land. Whereas with the Utoy Creek purchase, you have these enormous earthworks. What they had done at Utoy Creek is the blacks had, the Federals had gotten help the blacks who they had freed when they came down here, some of the slaves, and the Federal soldiers, and they dug these enormous trenches, which they stayed behind all during the month of August. And even after 140 years, those trenches are still there, even though they've been weathered a good bit. But you have the earthworks, that you can always tell what kind of earthwork you have, whether you have a place where there was a gun battery or a circular fort or just line, or a regular straight line connecting another piece of line, or you got a double set of entrenchments. But that's the remains on most battlefields. You have something like that, especially if the troops were there for any length of time. And under the ground, of course, you're going to have the mini balls and pieces of equipment, whatever was dropped by the soldiers at the time of the battle, buttons, whatnot. Now, there's still some of that remaining, even though for years people with metal detectors have gone around and picked up most of this equipment, this dropped bullets, buttons, whatnot. But there's still some of it out there because we have archaeologists do shovel tests at the battlefields a lot of times before we'll even make an offer on them.
Now, when you say earthwork, what do you mean by that?
I mean, well, like during World War I, because the Civil War was sort of a precursor to World War I. Early in the Civil War, the two sides would just stand up, face each other, and fire. And it was considered cowardly to hide behind a tree or hide in the ground in a rifle pit or something. But by 1863, and with this horrible number of casualties in the Civil War, the soldiers began digging in. So they dug trench lines to hide behind because during the Civil War, of course, you had infantry weapons increased in power. During the Napoleonic Wars, even during the Spanish-American War, the Mexican-American War, you had weapons that had smooth bores, and they shot a round ball. The accuracy is maybe 1,000 feet. Well, by the time of the Civil War, you had rifled muskets with a conical-shaped ball, the mini ball, and you could kill a man at 3/4 of a mile. So with the increased accuracy, the casualty rates were also increasing. So they would dig these breastworks at battlefields. Every time they stopped, they would dig a trench that would go about to their neck, and then they would put a headlog on top and shoot between the headlog and the top of the trench so they didn't get hit in the head, and which is an enormous amount of work, and especially for men who are already exhausted from marching all day and having an inadequate diet. But these works are still left. Some of them are. For instance, Cobb County, right after the Civil War, had 121 miles of earthworks that were dug just during the months of June and July 1864. And now, today, there's about 12 miles of earthworks left as they're disappearing, as urban sprawl subdivisions are built, whatnot. And so the Civil War Commission, part of our mission is to save what's left of these earthworks.
Now, if you were to go to Utoy Creek or in Cobb County, and what would you actually see if you're looking for an earthwork? What would you look for, and what would you see?
Well, it all depends what time of year you're going, Chad. Right now is the worst because the bushes and weeds are all grown up, and so it's hard to see. But the best time to go is during the fall or during the winter, and you'll see the undulations in the ground. And you can follow them generally depending on how long they go. Back in 1999, Dr. Sechrist, when he was with the commission, was involved in obtaining from Cobb County the last portion of the Johnson River line, which was a 7-mile-long line that General Johnson, the Confederate Army, had dug in front of the Chattahoochee as the last line of defense before the Chattahoochee. And there's still a portion of that line left. And when you go into the woods, you can just see it just goes on and on, continuous line of trenches. And every once in a while, there's a break for an artillery fort or a triangular-shaped fort called a stockade. But you can tell when you're there. It's just holes dug in the ground or long trenches dug in the ground.
Okay. I'd like to welcome you to our show, People in Politics. My guest tonight is Barry Brown of the Georgia Civil War Commission. We are taking phone calls. Our number here is 404-873-1349. And I believe we have a phone call right now. Good evening. You're on People in Politics.
Hi. I just tuned in. I was flipping through the channels, and my sister was a reenactor for several years in Virginia and helped with Brandy Station and Manassas. Mm-hmm. And my question is, what sites have you targeted? I'm sorry if I missed that part, and here in Georgia. And second of all, what can average people do to help in this cause? Because I think preserving this beautiful state is, important to everyone on some level.
Currently, our project is the Johnson River line in Cobb County, and it's in Mableton, Smyrna area. And right now, we're working also with an organization called Georgia Battlefields. Now, what I haven't said about the Civil War Commission yet is the governor, with his last budget, has zeroed us out of the budget. So we have no more money, and we're going to be inactive for at least 6 months until the legislature meets the next time for 2005. So we really won't be doing anything, unfortunately. But Georgia Battlefields is a 501(c) nonprofit organization, and they have a $25 membership fee. And just giving $25 to Georgia Battlefields and reading their newsletter, and they will keep you abreast of whatever is going on as far as Civil War preservation in the state of Georgia.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I think the caller brings up a good point. It's not so much only about preserving Civil War sites or heritage on our past. It's also about preserving beautiful green space. And you mentioned that earlier, that it's kind of a two-pronged approach. You want to approach the green space as well as the Civil War heritage.
Well, you try and get any kind of coalition that you can and build the coalition as large as possible. And if someone's interested in green space, other people interested in preservation of history, you combine the two, everybody's happy.
Have you had any negative reaction to the formation of the Georgia Civil War Commission?
Actually, no, we haven't. Not when the commission is involved in its mission, which is the preservation of historic sites and the education of the people of Georgia about the Civil War era.
What is the stance of the Georgia Civil War Commission on the Georgia state flag controversy?
Well, we're a preservation organization, so and we're also a state organization, so we really don't get involved with the state flag.
Okay, we have another phone call. Good evening, you're on People in Politics.
Yes, I want to ask him a question. Since we're honoring the Confederates, in their day, they were clearly terrorists. They were clearly terrorists. They fought for hate. They fought to keep African American people enslaved. They fought basically to preserve the status quo. Okay, now the terrorists, they're fighting for hate. They're fighting to keep people enslaved. They're fighting to keep people repressed and oppressed. Shouldn't we dedicate certain days for them and have special activities for them where they can fly the little flags they use? Or maybe for the Nazis, maybe we should have a holiday for the Nazis, maybe an Adolf Hitler Day. I mean, basically all these groups of people stand for the same thing.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. We preserve land.
Why preserve it? Why preserve land that was wrongly used? It was wrongly used for killing people, basically battlefields.
Preserving battlefields brings in tourist dollars, millions and millions of tourist dollars to the state of Georgia.
Well, here in the state of Georgia, I mean, we've gotten over the Civil War. A lot of people haven't, but let's move on here into the next century. Let's bury the Civil War. Let's bury the problems of the Civil War. I mean, yeah, we still do have a lot of unresolved problems from the Civil War, a lot of unfulfilled promises and such. Those promises won't get filled. So we know this. Let's just close the book. Let's bury the Civil War. Let's bury these people. Let's bury the hatred. As long as we keep reliving the Civil War and talking about the Civil War, it's like picking at a big, huge, festering canker sore on Lady Liberty. And we won't let it heal. Let it heal. Don't continue picking that wound.
Caller, I have a question for you. What do you think about the idea that by preserving some negative aspects of history, you're remembering that so that it won't happen again? Do you think that's...
We remember it in our hearts. We remember it in our minds. I think humans have some type of genetic memory, let's say. That's why a lot of us have the same color hair, different color hairs, and so forth. We remember. We'll always remember. Something like that will never be forgotten. But I mean, we want to try to close the book on that era here in the state of Georgia.
I think a lot of times the focus, and you're perfectly correct in saying that half of the focus, of course, is on the Confederates and the fact that they kept African Americans enslaved. But also the federal forces from the North came down here to unite the nation and to free the slaves. What about that aspect of the battle?
Okay, the federal
And the
forces
350,000 of them that died.
Abraham Lincoln said if he could stop slavery, he would. If he would stop the spread of slavery, he would. If he can preserve slavery, he would. He would have done all of the above. It wasn't about freeing people. It wasn't about a righteous cause. It was basically hitting the southern white man where it hurt, in his pocket.
It was about
if you
freeing
take
people
away
because
finance,
that's
if you-
exactly what the end result of it was.
No, that was the purpose of it. Read history. Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist. Maybe George Washington or maybe Thomas Jefferson or those people you can say were abolitionists. But Abraham Lincoln, no sir. We revere him as an abolitionist, but he was not an abolitionist.
Abraham Lincoln had started out the war saying he wanted to preserve the Union. However, by 1863, the reason for the war was to end slavery.
The reason for the war changed.
You're exactly correct. From 1861 to 1863,
And the
it
reason for
changed.
that was they knew it was a job that could never be completed without black men. They didn't have enough troops. They didn't have enough troops, and then they had a whole gang of 10 guys
Well, then,
in the fight.
if the black troops were fighting the good cause, why would you want to obliterate all Civil War memory?
Why would I want to obliterate all Civil War memory? Yeah, the black troops fought a good cause, and look what happened to them afterwards. The United States refused them compensation. They imprisoned a lot of guys. I mean, a lot of bad stuff came out of this. And a lot of times we just want to bury it. We just want to dig a big hole and put it in and bury it. But it seems like the United States, they won't let us forget the shame and indignity of slavery, what happened prior to the Civil War, or what happened after the Civil War.
Caller, may I ask you a question?
For the last 60 or 70 years, man, we've been trying to bury it. And y'all just...
Matt, may I ask you a question, caller? What do you think about this double approach of not only preserving a Civil War site, but also preserving it for green space so that it won't be developed upon? Do you think that's a good idea?
If they want to develop it, let them develop it. Let them do anything they want with it. Just as long as, they just quit waving Robert Lee and all these other criminals in our face. These guys were clearly criminals. They were clearly terrorists. They were clearly murderers.
Okay.
And we need to actually face up to the fact that these guys were that.
I understand. Thank you for your comments, caller. We really appreciate them. That's an important call. Thank you. Barry, your reaction to that?
I don't think he understood what I was talking about. I'm talking about preservation. I didn't say anything about waving Robert E. Lee in anybody's face. I don't know what he's talking about.
Preservation, you're talking about land preservation.
Yeah, land preservation.
We have one more phone call. Good evening. You're on People in Politics.
How you doing, Barry? Y'all doing a great job, great work, and I'm wondering...
Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering, what are the chances of Governor Perdue and the legislature reinstating some money so we can buy some of these endangered battlefields and green space before they disappear forever?
We're working on that right now, and we certainly hope that happens. Can't say right now for sure, but we'll see the next legislative session what happens.
Have you got some support within the legislature for doing that?
Yes, sir, we do.
What can people do to sort of help you all out?
Write a letter to your legislator and tell them that it's of utmost importance to reinstate the budget to the Georgia Civil War Commission, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'd just like to say to that last caller, I don't know why he wouldn't want to honor the Union soldiers, particularly the black soldiers who fought for the Union. I don't know why he wouldn't want to honor them by preserving the battlefields they fought on and those battles they won.
That was the point I was trying to bring up, but evidently he doesn't feel that way.
So, it's very unfair to accuse y'all of doing something that would be considered as supporting, slavery. It's just, really y'all are just trying to preserve some wonderful things that were done by the people who were trying to abolish slavery. So keep up the good work, and we sure hope we can get some money reinstated for y'all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your call. Bear, are there any African Americans on the Georgia Civil War Commission?
Yes, there are.
And how many, and what are their names?
There's Dr. Elmore and Carl Barnes.
And what is their role in the commission? Are they Civil War buffs, or are they...
Dr. Elmore is a historian, and Carl Barnes is a city planner, and his interest is history.
Okay. We'd like to thank you for joining us tonight on People in Politics. Oh. Okay, that's cool. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, 1 minute just goes really fast. I didn't think it was... That's cool. Thanks.
Well, that was fun.
I guess next one with 1 minute, you probably just go ahead and wrap it up, shouldn't I? That's good. We learn as we go along. Hey, Barry, can you leave your mic on a second? I want to record that closing. Could you turn the tape off?